Grace Thompson had forgotten what it felt like to wake up naturally, without her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. She sat at the edge of her bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the wall of her small apartment, counting her breaths the way the therapist had taught her. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. It never worked anymore. 2 years. 730 nights of this endless cycle. She would fall asleep around midnight, exhausted from fighting her own mind all day, only to jolt awake 2 or 3 hours later with that familiar sensation of drowning. The panic would flood her system, and then she would be up until dawn, pacing her tiny living room, drinking chamomile tea that did nothing, scrolling through her phone without seeing anything on the screen. The insomnia had started after the accident. A car crash on a rainy November night that had taken her older sister, Melissa. Grace had been driving. The other driver had run a red light, but logic did not matter to grief or guilt. Her mind had decided that sleep was dangerous, that letting go of consciousness meant losing control, meant something terrible would happen again. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant she could set her own hours, could work at 4 in the morning when sleep refused to come, could take a nap at 3 in the afternoon if her body finally gave in. But it was not living. It was surviving, barely. Grace pushed herself off the bed and walked to her kitchen, filling the kettle more out of habit than any belief it would help. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in a neighborhood that used to be rough but was slowly gentrifying. She could not afford much else. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster. She had tried everything. Sleep medications that left her groggy but still woke her up in the middle of the night. Meditation apps. Therapy. Exercise. Cutting out caffeine entirely. Nothing worked. The insomnia was not about habits or routines. It was about the fundamental terror that had lodged itself in her nervous system and refused to leave. The kettle whistled, and she poured water over a peppermint tea bag, watching the water turn pale green. She wrapped her hands around the mug and walked to her small living room window, looking out at the quiet street below. Most of the buildings were dark. Normal people were sleeping. She felt like an alien observing a world she no longer belonged to. Her phone buzzed on the counter and she picked it up. An email from a potential client. She opened it, grateful for the distraction. The email was from someone named Jonathan Young, requesting a meeting to discuss a branding project for his company. He had seen her portfolio online and wanted to discuss a complete visual identity overhaul. The email was professional but friendly, and he suggested meeting at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. Grace replied immediately, confirming the meeting. Work was the one thing that still made sense, the one area where her sleepless nights gave her an advantage. She had more hours than anyone else to perfect her designs, to obsess over color palettes and typography until everything was exactly right. By the time the sun came up, she had already showered, dressed, and completed 3 hours of work on another project. She forced herself to eat breakfast, scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard, and then tried to rest on the couch with her eyes closed, even though she knew sleep would not come. At 2 in the afternoon, she walked to the coffee shop. It was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their craft very seriously. She ordered a decaf latte, another concession to the insomnia, and found a table near the window. Jonathan Young arrived exactly on time. Grace recognized him immediately, not because she knew what he looked like, but because he carried himself with a particular kind of confidence that suggested he was used to being in charge. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was professionally styled but not overly fussy. He wore a navy suit without a tie, the collar of his white shirt open. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, and when he smiled at her, she noticed the smile reach those eyes. "Grace Thompson?" he asked, extending his hand. "That is me," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. He ordered a black coffee and joined her at the table. "Thank you for meeting me on short notice. I have been looking at your portfolio for the past week, and I am really impressed with your work. The rebrand you did for that organic skincare company was brilliant." "Thank you," Grace said, feeling a small flutter of pride. Compliments about her work always meant more than compliments about anything else. Jonathan pulled out a tablet and showed her his company logo. "This is what I am working with right now. I started my company 5 years ago, and we have grown faster than I ever anticipated. But this logo does not reflect who we are anymore." "What does your company do?" Grace asked, studying the outdated design on the screen. "We manufacture and distribute ergonomic office furniture." "I know it sounds boring, but we have revolutionized the industry with some innovative designs that actually help with posture and long-term health. We have contracts with major corporations now, and we are about to expand internationally. I need branding that reflects quality, innovation, and professionalism." Grace nodded, her mind already turning over ideas. "What is the company name?" "Kinetic Solutions," he said. She liked the name. It suggested movement, progress, problem-solving. "I can definitely work with this." "When do you need the rebrand completed?" "I am hoping for a full package within 3 months. Logo, color palette, typography guidelines, business cards, letterhead, website mock-ups. I know it is a lot." "It is ambitious, but it is doable," Grace said. She pulled out her own notebook and started sketching rough ideas while they talked. Jonathan watched her work, occasionally offering input about what he liked or did not like. They talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing easily between design concepts and broader discussions about business philosophy. Grace found herself actually enjoying the interaction, which was rare these days. Most of her client meetings felt like obligations, but Jonathan was genuinely passionate about his company, and his enthusiasm was contagious. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said, his tone shifting slightly. "You look exhausted. Are you okay?" Grace stiffened. She had gotten good at hiding the sleep deprivation, or so she thought. "I am fine. Just been working late nights." "I get that," he said, though his expression suggested he did not entirely believe her. "I used to run myself into the ground when I first started the company. 70-hour weeks, sleeping in the office. It nearly destroyed me. I learned the hard way that you cannot build something sustainable if you are destroying yourself in the process." "That is good advice," Grace said, deflecting. She did not want to explain the insomnia to a potential client. She did not want to explain it to anyone. They wrapped up the meeting with an agreement on pricing and deadlines. Jonathan paid upfront for the first month of work, which was more than generous. As they stood to leave, he handed her his business card. "My cell number is on there," he said. "If you need anything or have questions outside of normal business hours, feel free to call or text. I keep weird hours myself, so you would not be bothering me." "Thank you," Grace said, slipping the card into her bag. Walking home, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement about the project, which was the biggest and most lucrative she had landed in over a year. But also something else, something she could not quite name. Jonathan Young had been kind, not in a patronizing way, but in a way that felt genuine. She was not used to that anymore. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Grace worked on the Kinetic Solutions rebrand every night, sometimes texting Jonathan with questions or sending him mock-ups for feedback. He always responded quickly, no matter the hour. She learned that he really did keep strange hours. He would text back at 2 in the morning, at 5 in the morning, at midnight. One night, around 3, she sent him 3 different logo variations. Her phone rang almost immediately. "Sorry, I know texting is easier, but I wanted to talk through these with you," Jonathan said when she answered. "It is fine," Grace said, surprised by how much she did not mind the call. They spent an hour on the phone, dissecting the designs, talking through the subtle differences in font weight and the psychological impact of different color combinations. It was the kind of conversation Grace loved, getting deep into the minutiae of design theory. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said after they had settled on a direction for the logo. "Sure." "Why are you always awake at this hour?" Grace hesitated. She had been asked this before by other people, and she usually deflected or lied. But something about Jonathan's tone made her want to tell the truth. "I do not sleep much," she said finally. "I have insomnia, pretty severe." "How long?" 2 years. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That must be incredibly hard." "It is what it is," Grace said, uncomfortable with the sympathy. "I have gotten used to it." "Have you tried getting help?" "I have tried everything," she said, and she could not keep the weariness out of her voice. "Doctors, therapists, medications, supplements, sleep hygiene, meditation. Nothing works. My brain just does not trust sleep anymore." "Why not?" His question was gentle, not prying. Grace found herself telling him about the accident, about Melissa, about the guilt that sat on her chest every night like a physical weight. She had not talked about this with anyone in months. Her friends had stopped asking because her answers had stopped changing. But Jonathan listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes or solutions. "I am so sorry," he said when she finished. "That is an impossible thing to carry." "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "Listen," Jonathan said, and she heard something shift in his voice, a decisiveness. "I have an idea, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." "Okay." "I have a house in the suburbs. It is too big for one person. 5 bedrooms, way too much space. I bought it as an investment property but ended up living in it because I liked the neighborhood. What if you stayed in one of the guest rooms for a while?" Grace's first instinct was to refuse. "I cannot do that. That is too much." "Hear me out," he said. "You do not sleep because you feel alone and unsafe, right? Your brain is stuck in crisis mode. What if you were not alone? What if someone was in the next room and you knew that if something happened, you would not be by yourself?" "Jonathan, I cannot just move into your house. That is insane. We barely know each other." "I know it sounds crazy," he said, "but I have been thinking about this since you told me you have insomnia. I have space. You need help. It is not a big deal." "It is a huge deal," Grace said. "Why would you even offer this?" There was another pause. "Honestly, because I know what it is like to be stuck in a cycle you cannot break out of. After my father died, I had panic attacks for a year. I could not be alone in the house. My younger brother stayed with me for 6 months until I got through the worst of it. Someone being there, just knowing they were in the next room, it helped. Maybe it would help you too." Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes, which was ridiculous. She did not cry anymore. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Jonathan said. "No pressure. The offer stands whenever you want to take me up on it." "I will think about it," Grace said, though she was already certain she would not do it. It was too strange, too much to accept from someone she barely knew. But over the next week, the idea kept creeping back into her mind. What if he was right? What if the problem was not just the trauma but the isolation? She lived alone, worked alone, spent her sleepless nights alone. Her brain had no evidence that the world was safe, that she could let her guard down. She found herself researching Jonathan Young online, which felt vaguely stalkerish but also necessary if she was considering his offer. What she found was impressive. He had built kinetic solutions from nothing, starting in his garage and growing it into a company worth millions. There were articles about his business philosophy, interviews where he talked about prioritizing employee wellness and sustainable growth. He sat on the board of two charities, one focused on workplace safety and another on mental health resources. Nothing she found raised any red flags. If anything, he seemed almost too good to be true. On a Thursday night, or technically early Friday morning, Grace texted him at 4. "Are you still awake, always?" he replied immediately. "What's up? I want to take you up on your offer if it is still available." Her phone rang within seconds. "Really?" Jonathan sounded pleased. "You are sure?" "I am not sure about anything," Grace said honestly. "But I cannot keep doing this. I need to try something different." "Okay, when do you want to move in? Is this weekend too soon?" "This weekend is perfect. I will make sure the guest room is ready. Do you have a lot of stuff?" "Not much. I can probably fit everything in my car." "I will help you move," Jonathan said. "What is your address?" She gave it to him, and they made plans for Saturday morning. When she hung up, Grace sat on her couch in the dark, wondering if she had just made a huge mistake or the best decision of the past 2 years. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth for October. Jonathan showed up at her apartment at 9 with a truck. "I figured we might need more space than your car," he said when she opened the door. Grace had packed most of her belongings into boxes the night before, running on nervous energy and zero sleep. She did not own much. Clothes, books, her computer and work equipment, some kitchen items. The furniture had come with the apartment. Jonathan helped her carry everything down to the truck, and Grace was struck by how easy it was to be around him. He did not try to fill the silence with small talk, did not ask invasive questions. He just worked steadily, lifting heavy boxes like they weighed nothing. "That is everything?" he asked when they loaded the last box. "That is everything," Grace confirmed. "Let's go then." The drive to Jonathan's house took 30 minutes. They left the city behind and drove through suburbs that got progressively nicer, the houses larger and farther apart. When Jonathan finally pulled into a driveway, Grace felt her stomach flip. The house was beautiful. Not ostentatious, but clearly expensive. It was a modern 2-story with large windows and clean lines, surrounded by mature trees that gave it privacy from the neighbors. "This is your house," Grace said, suddenly very aware of the difference between them. She had been living in a tiny apartment with peeling paint. He lived here. "This is it," Jonathan said, either not noticing her discomfort or choosing to ignore it. "Come on, I will show you around." The interior was even more impressive. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it came from actual furniture stores and not second-hand shops. Everything was clean and organized but not sterile. There were books on the shelves, framed photographs, a guitar leaning against the wall in the living room. "You play?" Grace asked, nodding at the guitar. "Badly," Jonathan said with a grin. "But it is fun. Do you play any instruments?" "I took piano lessons as a kid. I was terrible." He laughed and led her upstairs. "Your room is this one," he said, opening the door to a spacious bedroom with its own attached bathroom. The walls were painted a soft gray, and there was a large bed with white linens, a desk by the window, and a comfortable-looking armchair in the corner. "This is beautiful," Grace said, overwhelmed. "I am glad you like it. My room is just down the hall, and there is another bathroom up here if you need it. The kitchen is fully stocked, so help yourself to anything. I work from home most days, so I will be around, but I will stay out of your way." "You are not in my way," Grace said quickly. "You are being incredibly generous. I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Jonathan said. "Just try to rest. That is all I want." They spent the rest of the morning unloading her things and getting her settled. Jonathan insisted on ordering lunch from a Thai place he loved, and they ate on his back patio, which overlooked a yard with a garden that looked professionally maintained. "You garden?" Grace asked. "I try. It is a work in progress. I am better with furniture design than plants." They talked easily, the conversation flowing from topic to topic. Grace learned that Jonathan had a younger brother named Marcus who lived in Seattle, that he had played basketball in high school but blown out his knee senior year, that his favorite food was his grandmother's lasagna, but she had passed away 5 years ago, and he had never been able to replicate the recipe. As the sun started to set, Grace felt exhaustion creeping in, the kind that came from emotional overwhelm rather than physical tiredness. "I think I need to lie down," she said. "Of course. I will be downstairs if you need anything." Grace went to her new room and closed the door. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized that for the first time in 2 years, she did not feel alone. Jonathan was down the hall. If something happened, if she woke up panicking, she would not be by herself. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. That night, Grace fell asleep around 11, which was early for her. She woke up at 1:30, her heart racing, the familiar panic flooding her system. But instead of being alone in her dark apartment, she was in Jonathan's guest room. She could hear faint sounds from downstairs, maybe the television or music. She sat up, forcing herself to breathe slowly. After a few minutes, she got out of bed and opened her door. The hallway was dimly lit by a nightlight plugged into the wall. She could see light coming from downstairs. Grace walked down the stairs quietly. Jonathan was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his laptop, working on something. He looked up when he heard her. "Could not sleep?" he asked, his tone gentle. "I slept for a little while. That is more than usual." "That is progress," Jonathan said. "Do you want some tea? I was about to make some." "Sure." They went to the kitchen and Jonathan put the kettle on. Grace sat at the island, watching him move around the space with easy familiarity. "You not sleep much either?" she asked. "I sleep okay now," Jonathan said, "but I went through a period where I did not. After my father died, I had a lot of nightmares. I would avoid sleeping because I did not want to deal with them." "What changed?" "Time, mostly, therapy, and my brother staying with me. Just having someone else in the house made me feel safer. Eventually, the nightmares got less frequent, and I started sleeping normally again." He handed her a mug of chamomile tea, and they sat at the island together in comfortable silence. "Thank you for this," Grace said. "For letting me stay here. I know it is weird." "It is not weird," Jonathan said. "It is just practical. You need help and I have the space to help. That is all." But it felt like more than that to Grace. It felt like kindness on a scale she had not experienced in a long time. They talked until 3 in the morning, and then Grace felt tired enough to try sleeping again. This time, when she woke up at 5, she managed to fall back asleep after 20 minutes. It was not a full night, but it was better. The pattern continued over the next few weeks. Grace would sleep in fits and starts, but knowing Jonathan was in the house helped. Sometimes she would wake up and hear him working downstairs. Sometimes she would go down and find him in the kitchen or the living room, and they would talk or work side by side in comfortable silence. Grace continued working on the Kinetic Solutions rebrand, and Jonathan gave her feedback and input. The project was coming together beautifully, better than anything she had done before. She felt inspired in a way she had not in years. One evening, about a month after she moved in, they were sitting in the living room after dinner. Grace had cooked, insisting that she needed to contribute somehow, and Jonathan had raved about her pasta dish. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said. "Always. Why are you not married? Or dating someone? You are successful, you are kind, you have this amazing house. I do not understand why you are single." Jonathan laughed, but there was something rueful in it. "I was engaged a few years ago. Her name was Rebecca. We were together for 3 years, and I thought we were going to spend our lives together. What happened? She left me for someone else. A friend of mine, actually. They are married now." He said it matter-of-factly, but Grace could hear the old hurt underneath. "I am sorry. That is awful." "It was at the time," Jonathan said. "But honestly, I think we would have made each other miserable. She wanted me to be someone I was not. She wanted the money and the status, but not the actual work it took to build the company. She hated that I worked long hours, hated that I cared about my employees. She wanted me to sell the company and retire at 30 so we could travel the world. That does not sound like you. It is not. I love what I do. I love building things, solving problems. I did not want to retire. I wanted a partner who understood that." He looked at Grace with an expression she could not quite read. "What about you? Why are you not with someone?" "I was seeing someone when the accident happened," Grace said. "His name was Trevor. We had been together for about a year. After Melissa died, I fell apart, and he could not handle it. He tried for a few months, but eventually he told me he could not be with someone who was so broken. He left, and I do not blame him. I was not exactly easy to be around." "That is a terrible thing to say to someone," Jonathan said, anger flashing in his eyes. "You are not broken. You are grieving." "Maybe," Grace said, "but grief does break you in a way. I have not been the same person since. No one expects you to be. Trauma changes people. That does not make you broken. It makes you human." Grace felt tears stinging her eyes again. She had cried more in the past month than in the previous 2 years combined. Something about being in this house, about being around Jonathan, had cracked open the walls she had built around herself. "I am glad I am here," she said quietly. "I did not realize how lonely I was until I was not anymore." "I am glad you are here too," Jonathan said, and the way he looked at her made her heart do something complicated in her chest. That night, Grace slept for 5 hours straight. When she woke up, it was because light was streaming through the window, not because of panic. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, marveling at the fact that she had slept. Really slept. She grabbed her phone and saw it was 8 in the morning. She had gone to bed at midnight and slept until 8. 8 hours. A full night. Grace got out of bed and walked downstairs. Jonathan was in the kitchen making breakfast. "I slept through the night," she said, her voice full of wonder. Jonathan turned around, a huge smile spreading across his face. "Really, really. 8 hours." He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into a hug without thinking, and Grace hugged him back, overwhelmed by the simple joy of this achievement that most people took for granted. "I am so proud of you," Jonathan said into her hair, and Grace felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks but neither of them had acknowledged. When they pulled apart, they stood there for a moment, looking at each other. Grace became acutely aware of how close they were, how easy it would be to lean in and kiss him. Jonathan stepped back first, clearing his throat. "I am making eggs. Are you hungry?" "Starving," Grace said, trying to ignore the flutter of disappointment. Over breakfast, they talked about the rebrand. Grace showed him the final mock-ups for the website, and Jonathan was thrilled with them. "This is exactly what I wanted," he said. "Actually, it is better than what I wanted. You have exceeded every expectation." "I am glad," Grace said, feeling a warm glow of pride. "The official launch is in 2 weeks. I am having an event to unveil the new branding. I want you to be there. Of course, it is my work. I would love to see the reaction." "Good, and Grace," Jonathan looked at her seriously, "I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you want. Even after the project is done, you do not have to leave." I cannot stay here forever, Grace said, though the thought of leaving made her chest tighten. Why not? Because it is your house. Because I need to be independent. Because this was supposed to be temporary. What if I do not want it to be temporary? Jonathan said quietly. Grace's heart started beating faster. What do you mean? I mean, I like having you here. I like coming downstairs and finding you working at the kitchen table. I like cooking dinner together and watching terrible reality TV shows at midnight because neither of us can sleep. I like you, Grace. A lot. Grace stared at him, her mind racing. Jonathan, I do not think that is a good idea. Why not? Because I am a mess. Because I have been living in your house out of charity. Because the power dynamic is all wrong. You are not a mess, Jonathan said firmly. You are someone who has been through hell and is still standing. That is not weakness. That is strength. And this is not charity. I asked you to stay because I wanted to help, but it became so much more than that. I have feelings for you. Real feelings. You barely know me, Grace said, but her protest felt weak. I know you better than I have known most people I have dated for years. I know you take your coffee with way too much sugar. I know you sing to yourself when you are deep in work and do not realize anyone can hear you. I know you are brilliant and kind and funny. I know you carry guilt that is not yours to carry, and I wish I could take it away from you. He reached across the table and took her hand. I know I have fallen in love with you. Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. I have fallen in love with you too, but I am scared. Of what? That I am going to mess this up. That I am still too broken. That you will realize I am not worth all this effort. Grace, look at me. Jonathan waited until she met his eyes. You are worth everything, and you are not going to mess this up. We are going to figure this out together. Grace squeezed his hand, letting herself believe him. Okay. Okay. Okay, yes. I want to try this. Jonathan stood up and walked around the table, pulling her into his arms. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, Grace did not pull away. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then it deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. I have wanted to do that for weeks, Jonathan said. Me too, Grace admitted. They spent the rest of the day together, not doing anything particularly special. They worked on their respective projects, made lunch, took a walk around the neighborhood. But everything felt different now, charged with this new understanding between them. That night, Grace slept in her own room, but before she went to bed, Jonathan kissed her goodnight at her door. Sleep well, he said. You too. Grace climbed into bed and closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years she fell asleep without fear. She slept through the night again, dreaming of nothing in particular, just the pleasant blankness of deep rest. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace and Jonathan fell into a new rhythm. They were cautious with each other, testing the boundaries of this new relationship. They held hands while watching television. They kissed goodnight before bed. They talked about everything, sharing stories from their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. Grace continued to sleep better. Not every night was perfect. She still had bad nights where the insomnia crept back in, where she woke up panicking. But Jonathan was always there. Sometimes he would hear her moving around and come to check on her. They would sit in the kitchen and talk until she felt calm enough to try sleeping again. The night of the Kinetic Solutions rebrand launch arrived. Grace dressed carefully in a navy dress that she had bought specifically for the occasion. When she came downstairs, Jonathan was waiting in the living room in a suit, and the look on his face when he saw her made her blush. You look stunning, he said. You clean up pretty well yourself, Grace replied. The event was held at a hotel ballroom downtown. Jonathan had invited his major clients, business partners, employees, and local press. Grace felt nervous walking in, knowing that her work was about to be judged by all these people. But when Jonathan unveiled the new logo and branding materials, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People came up to Grace all night, congratulating her on the design, asking for her business card. She felt a swell of pride and accomplishment that she had not felt in years. Jonathan stayed by her side the entire evening, introducing her as the brilliant designer behind the rebrand. The way he looked at her, with such obvious pride and affection, made her feel like the most important person in the room. Toward the end of the night, Jonathan pulled her onto the small dance floor. A slow song was playing and he wrapped his arms around her waist. "Thank you for this," he said. "The rebrand is perfect. You are perfect." "I am not perfect," Grace said, but she was smiling. "You are perfect for me." They swayed together, and Grace rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She felt something she had not felt in 2 years. She felt happy. When they got home that night, Jonathan walked Grace to her room like he always did. But this time, when he kissed her goodnight, she pulled him closer. "Stay," she whispered. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." They went into her room together, and what happened next was tender and unhurried. Jonathan treated her like she was precious, and Grace let herself be vulnerable in a way she had not been since the accident. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Grace felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Jonathan replied, kissing her forehead. Grace fell asleep in his arms and slept through the night without waking once. The months that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. She and Jonathan settled into their relationship with an ease that surprised both of them. There were no games, no drama. They communicated openly about their needs and fears. When Grace had bad nights, Jonathan was patient. When Jonathan got stressed about work, Grace helped him find perspective. Grace's insomnia did not disappear completely, but it became manageable. She learned to trust sleep again, to trust that she was safe. Having Jonathan there made all the difference. Just knowing he was in the next room, or more often now, right beside her, quieted the panic that used to keep her awake. 6 months after the rebrand launch, Grace and Jonathan were having dinner at his favorite Italian restaurant when he reached across the table and took her hand. "Move into my room," he said. "Officially. Stop calling it the guest room and just be with me completely." "I thought I already had," Grace said with a laugh. "You still keep some of your things in there. I want all of your things in our room. I want this to be our house, not my house that you are staying in." "Okay," Grace said, tears pricking her eyes again. She still cried at the drop of a hat, but now they were happy tears. "Yes, I would love that." They spent that weekend moving the rest of Grace's belongings into Jonathan's room, rearranging furniture to make space for both of them. Grace put her books on his shelves, hung her clothes in his closet. It felt right, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. A year after Grace moved in, Jonathan proposed. They were in the backyard garden, which had flourished under Grace's care. She had discovered she actually enjoyed gardening, found it meditative. Jonathan had built raised beds for vegetables, and they spent summer evenings working in the soil together. He proposed without fanfare, just the two of them in the fading light. He got down on one knee and pulled out a simple, beautiful ring. "Grace, you changed my life. You made me remember what it feels like to share a life with someone, to build something together. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Grace said, pulling him up to kiss her. "Yes, absolutely yes." They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the backyard. Grace's parents were there, along with Jonathan's brother Marcus and a small group of close friends. It was intimate and perfect, exactly what they both wanted. Grace wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from their garden. Jonathan wore a gray suit and cried when he saw her walking toward him. They wrote their own vows, promising to support each other through the bad nights and the good days, to be patient with each other's wounds, to choose love even when it was hard. When the officiant pronounced them married, Jonathan kissed Grace like it was the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. 2 years after they married, Grace got pregnant. It was unexpected but welcome. She had been nervous about how her body would handle pregnancy, worried that the hormones would bring back the severe insomnia. But Jonathan was there every step of the way, attending every doctor's appointment, reading books about pregnancy and childbirth, making sure she felt supported. The insomnia did flare up during the 3rd trimester when she was too uncomfortable to sleep well. But even on the worst nights, Jonathan would stay up with her, rubbing her back, bringing her water, talking to her until she dozed off. Their daughter was born on a sunny morning in May. They named her Melissa Grace Young after Grace's sister. When the nurse placed the baby in Grace's arms, she looked at Jonathan and saw tears streaming down his face. "We made a person," he said in wonder. "We made a person," Grace agreed, laughing through her own tears. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting in a completely different way than insomnia had been. Grace was tired from late-night feedings and diaper changes, but it was a normal kind of tired, the kind that came with purpose. She and Jonathan tag-teamed the night shifts, supporting each other through the chaos. When Melissa was 6 months old, Grace realized she had not had a severe bout of insomnia in over a month. She mentioned it to Jonathan one evening while they were giving the baby a bath. "You know what?" she said. "I think I am sleeping normally now." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes soft. "You are. I am tired because of the baby, but I am not afraid of sleep anymore. I do not wake up panicking. I just wake up because our daughter has excellent lungs." "That is amazing," Jonathan said. He leaned over and kissed her, careful not to jostle the baby. "I am so proud of you." "I could not have done it without you," Grace said. "You saved me." "We saved each other," Jonathan corrected. Grace thought about that as they finished bathing Melissa and put her in pajamas. It was true. Jonathan had saved her from the isolation and fear that had consumed her life. But she had saved him too, from the loneliness he had been living with, from the belief that he could not trust someone with his whole heart again. 3 years after Melissa was born, they had a son named Oliver. Their family felt complete. The house that had once been too big for one person was now filled with the sounds of children laughing, toys scattered across the floor, family dinners around the kitchen table. Grace's career had flourished. After the success of the Kinetic Solutions rebrand, she had been flooded with requests from other companies. She was able to be selective about the projects she took on, working with businesses whose missions she believed in. She worked from home, which allowed her to be present for her children while still pursuing her passion. Jonathan had expanded Kinetic Solutions internationally, just as he had planned. But he had also learned to delegate more, to trust his team. He made sure to be home for dinner every night, to be present for the important moments. Work was still important to him, but his family came first. One evening, when Melissa was 5 and Oliver was 2, Grace and Jonathan sat on their back patio after putting the kids to bed. They had a monitor beside them, and they could hear the soft sounds of the children sleeping through the speaker. "You remember the night we met?" Grace asked, leaning against Jonathan's shoulder. "Of course. You looked exhausted and beautiful, and I knew I wanted to work with you." "Did you know then that we would end up here?" "No," Jonathan admitted, "but I hoped. There was something about you that felt like coming home." Grace tilted her face up to kiss him. "I love our life. I love our life too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Grace thought about the woman she had been 4 years ago, trapped in a cycle of fear and sleeplessness, convinced she would never feel whole again. She thought about the kindness of a stranger who offered her a room in his house, who saw her struggling and decided to help without expecting anything in return. That kindness had changed everything. It had given her the space to heal, the safety to let her guard down. It had led to love, to marriage, to this beautiful family they had built together. Grace still had moments when the old fear crept in. She still had nights when she woke up with her heart racing. But Jonathan was always there, a steady presence beside her, reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was home. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "For what?" Jonathan asked. "For staying in the next room so I was not alone, for being patient, for loving me when I did not know how to love myself." Jonathan pulled her closer. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me, for building this life with me." They sat there until the sky was fully dark, wrapped in each other and the life they had created. And when they finally went inside and climbed into bed, Grace fell asleep within minutes, her head on Jonathan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She slept through the night, dreamless and peaceful, knowing that when she woke up he would still be there. The insomnia that had ruled her life for 2 years was gone, not because of medication or therapy or sleep hygiene, though those things had helped. It was gone because she had learned to trust again. To trust sleep, to trust another person, to trust that good things could happen even after tragedy. Years later, when Melissa was old enough to ask about how her parents met, Grace would tell her the story. She would explain that sometimes the hardest times in life lead to the most beautiful outcomes, that kindness from strangers can change everything. That healing does not mean forgetting, but it does mean learning to live fully again. And every night, when Grace kissed her children goodnight and climbed into bed beside her husband, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. The sleepless nights, the fear, the pain, they had all been part of the path that led her to this life, to this love, to this family. She would fall asleep with a smile on her face, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And in the morning, she would wake up naturally, sunlight streaming through the windows, Jonathan beside her, and another beautiful day ahead. The woman who had not slept a full night in 2 years had found her way home, not to a place, but to a person. And that person had stayed in the next room, night after night, until she felt safe enough to truly rest, until she felt loved enough to truly live.